Hello, I'm Tom Caputo, Chair of the Financial Task Force 2 and Vice Chair of the Belmont Select Board. Given the streamlined agenda for town meeting this June, I wanted to take a moment to provide a virtual update to town meeting on the recent work of the Financial Task Force and update everyone on the financial challenges that lay ahead for Belmont. First off, I would like to take just a moment and acknowledge the work that has been done by the many participants in the Financial Task Force process. We're relying upon the thoughtful and engaged work of many members of our town and school administration, as well as representatives from a number of our elected and appointed boards. I truly thank them for all their work over the many months. Let me start with the bottom line. Belmont, once again, is at a financial crossroads with a very difficult budget situation looming in the years ahead. We stretch the 2015 override funds as far as they will go. We continue to grapple with the daunting challenges of Massachusetts Proposition 2.5, which places constraints on our ability to grow revenue. Yet at the same time, we continue to be challenged with rising expenses, creating a structural deficit. Add to that the unanticipated arrival of COVID-19 and the associated economic consequences, and Belmont is in a position where we face a daunting structural deficit in FY22 and must consider a Proposition 2.5 override, or make meaningful structural reductions to town services in the years to come. This is a critical time for town meeting and the broader community to engage on this topic. Some members of the Financial Task Force have recently characterized our situation as a financial crisis for the town, and I agree that is an appropriate characterization. So I'd like to take the next few minutes in this virtual update and summarize the current challenges we face, as well as the emerging path going forward. So where are we? The 2015 override achieved its objectives. It was originally designed to provide funding through a tax increase that would sustain Belmont budgets for 3 years. We're pleased to say that it has actually lasted 6 years, and the FY21 budget that we will be voting at town meeting in a couple of weeks represents that 6th year. So the override more than achieved its goals. Unfortunately, Proposition 2.5 continues to constrain our revenue growth. So as town meeting members are certainly aware, Massachusetts state law ensures that cities and towns cannot increase property tax levies more than 2.5% over the prior year unless the voters explicitly approve it through, generally speaking, a Proposition 2.5 override. Now there's some allotments for new growth, but largely towns are constrained by 2.5 to 3%. So towns like Belmont that are heavily dependent upon residential property taxes and that face a challenging set of cost drivers just to maintain level services are frequently presented with the need to go back to the voters periodically to ensure an override to provide sufficient funds to cover town costs. It is worth noting that while Belmont has approved recent debt exclusions, if you look over the last 17 years, Belmont has only approved one Proposition 2.5 override, specifically to fund the operating budget of the town. We're also seeing cost drivers continuing to increase at a growth rate that exceeds the 2.5 to 3% that I described before. Everyone at town meeting is well aware of the challenges of school enrollment. I think we've been talking for a while about the capital needs as a result of years of underinvestment. In addition, we have a number of cost drivers, including health insurance, pension costs, town and school staffing, and mandated school services like ELL and special ed that are continuing to grow at growth rates that exceed the 2.5 to 3%. This increase in costs that are not offset by increases in revenue is creating this structural deficit. And unfortunately, COVID-19 has made a challenging situation even more so. We are anticipating, as a result of the financial impact of COVID, that we will see meaningful reductions in state funding to municipalities, as well as reductions in both our local revenues and receipts tied to meals taxes and building permits, et cetera, as well as anticipated reduction in real estate development, which traditionally supports new growth. We're talking multiple millions of dollars of impact here. And unfortunately, this doesn't even contemplate what could be incremental costs, particularly on the school side of having to contend with the virus and the pandemic in the months ahead. So what's next? So for FY21, the town and schools have come together in recent months and addressed the incremental challenges of COVID and put together a balanced budget. Now, this is absolutely what we are calling a belt-tightening budget. And it does result in substantial reductions to expenditures as well as deferral of many capital needs. In order to balance this budget, we have tapped into many one-time and non-recurring sources of funding, including free cash and money in some of our stabilization accounts. We've also made truly unsustainable reductions to many of our capital expenditures and things like our OPEB contributions. So we are able to balance the budget, but not without making adjustments. And that includes reductions in services. So this will certainly be a budget that community members will see not as a level services budget, but rather as a belt-tightening budget. We have made adjustments to the way we're allocating capital. We are deferring facilities maintenance. We are postponing work on roads and sidewalks. We anticipate increases in class size as we are not providing incremental headcount in the schools. We're reducing library hours, recreation programs, overtime. It will certainly be something that the taxpayers of Belmont will notice. We have not made layoffs. There was a specific goal to not initiate layoffs in FY21, but rather to make adjustments that allowed us to carry over, get through one more year, and then we can tackle the question for FY22 about further reductions and layoffs. If you look at our projected budget, we have that structural deficit that I talked about, which is significant, $7 to $9 million now that the 2015 override funds have reached the end of their ability to help us balance the budget. In addition, we see the incremental costs of COVID and its impact upon revenue. For FY22, which is not the FY20 budget we'll be approving now, but the subsequent year's budget, we're looking at least a $10 to $13 million deficit, and that deficit will continue in the years to come. The impact upon COVID may be less in future years, but we anticipate, based upon historical recessions and economic shocks, that it will last a number of years. So we will have to consider a Proposition 2.5 override in the next 12 months and in advance of FY22 if we are not to initiate substantial cuts to town services. So the Financial Task Force will be recommending an override. The timing of that override, whether or not it's at the November election this year or April of next year, and the specific size of that override is still being discussed. It will ultimately be a recommendation by the Financial Task Force, approved by the Select Board, hopefully in consultation with the Warrant Committee, School Committee, and other Capital Budget Committee, and other relevant groups. We on the Financial Task Force, and if I can speak for my Select Board colleagues, are very aware that this is a challenging time to be asking Belmont residents for a tax increase. But we also believe that the potential scope and nature of the cuts that are being contemplated or will have to be contemplated in FY22 requires us to give the voters an opportunity to decide what their priorities are and whether or not this is something that they want to fund or not. We will also continue the work of the Financial Task Force to continue to look at ways to address the structural challenges that we have. These include ways to grow revenue beyond what is possible with Proposition 2.5, including new growth, as well as pilot payments. We're also looking at a number of different cost mitigation opportunities. We have to think about different ways to deliver town services. We have to take a look at levers like upcoming contract negotiations and mechanisms that may allow us to find ways to collaborate with other communities. We're also taking a hard look at capital planning and are putting together a long-term capital planning committee. So we are acknowledging that this has to be something that we tackle, both with changes to how we approach and how we deliver services in town, in addition to contemplating an override. So I thank town meeting members for listening. I encourage you to get involved in the conversation and the discussions in the coming weeks and months, and to talk to your constituents to make sure that this becomes a broader conversation in town. Thank you very much. I appreciate everybody's time.